Yeah,
It's on there.
it says it
Madam
is.
Chair, you are live.
Thank you. Okay, I'll call this meeting of the Charter Review Commission to order. The date is March 9, 2023, and it is 5:04 p.m. And I will ask Elizabeth to call the roll.
Sarah Amador Guzman. Alba Blondis,
Present?
Paul Deerdeck,
Here.
John Paul Granillo,
Present.
Peter Ives,
Here.
Alicia Montoya,
Here.
Lily Mae Ortiz,
Present.
Maria Perez,
Present.
Chair Long.
Here,
You have a quorum, Madam Chair.
thank you. Next on our agenda is approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved. I'm Alba.
Alba,
I got you.
right? And is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Commissioner Deerdeck or Commissioner Granillo? All right, let's do a roll call on the approval of the agenda.
Commissioner Blondis,
Yes.
Commissioner Deerdeck,
Yes.
Commissioner Granillo,
Yes.
Commissioner Ives,
Yes.
Commissioner Montoya,
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz,
Yes.
Commissioner Perez,
Yes.
Chair Long.
Yes,
Motion passes.
thank you. Next is approval of our minutes of our last meeting. And those were all provided to you through the online link to them. This is from February 23, 2023. Are there any changes anyone needs to make to the minutes? Yes, Commissioner Blondis.
It's a question, I think, whether on page 7 of the minutes,
Yeah,
whether the charter's requirements for recall should be modified. This issue was addressed by subcommittee 1, not 2.
Okay.
That's correct.
Page 7.
Yes, ma'am. Is that correct? It was subcommittee 1, I believe.
Yes,
that-
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Correct.
Okay,
Okay.
that's all.
Thank you.
thank you.
Mhm,
Yes,
you're welcome.
Commissioner Deerdeck.
Thank you. I don't know what to do about this. I realize that we were hampered by the fact that our recorder was not present and trying to deal with it on YouTube. And that must have been certainly more challenging than I could have managed. And the parts where I described my report for our subcommittee, there are so many sentences that picked up part of what I said and not other parts, and that changed the meaning dramatically. Do you want me to go through every bit of that? Or can we simply, by common consent, understand that what I report today supersedes what I reported 2 weeks ago?
Well, I think you can certainly state that for these minutes. And when you're giving your report, we'll know that you're going to cover the same material, which I was hoping you would summarize that as well. So maybe it was a problem with I think, Elizabeth, we were all in person and you were remote. So maybe it was a problem with her hearing us at that point.
Well, I was on Zoom and I couldn't, the voices were going, the sound was going in and out.
Exactly.
And so
it was clear to me the sentences that you heard, and it was also clear to me the sentences I said that you didn't hear.
yeah. And when I was trying to tell you all, I can't hear you, but you weren't hearing me either at that time. So it was a little bit difficult. So I'll make sure I look at it on YouTube if that happens again. So I make sure I get everything, Commissioner.
Okay. So Aaron, do you think it's all right if we approve the minutes sort of with that statement from Commissioner Deerdeck that it probably doesn't accurately reflect his report, but he's going to re-deliver it?
Chair Long, commissioners, if you approve the minutes, the idea is that it accurately reflects, I think, what
Yeah.
happened. So But if that doesn't bother you, that I mean, the missing items I think are less of a problem than something that's a misstatement. So if there's a misstatement, although I think Counselor Ives has something as well. If there's a misstatement, you might want to correct it.
Madam Chair and Ms. McSherry, if Commissioner Deerdeck and if I don't know what Commissioner Ives' issue is, but if you want to change, if you want me to put in an attachment to the minutes that gives a more clearer idea of what you said, you just need to send it to me and I'd be happy to do that.
I'll do it tonight.
Okay, and same with
good.
Commissioner Ives,
Okay.
if that's his issue. I don't know if it is, but.
I was just.
Okay, let's go to you, Commissioner Ives.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I fundamentally agree with Aaron that, I mean, the minutes are supposed to accurately reflect the activities taken. There's no immediate need to approve these minutes today, knowing that there might be some significant rewrite that needs to be done based upon what Commissioner Durdock has stated. An easy solution would be, unfortunately, if Elizabeth wouldn't mind looking at the YouTube and making corrections as necessary, maybe running them by Commissioner Deerdeck, and then we can just approve 2 sets of minutes at our next meeting.
Commissioner and
Yeah, it
Madam
sounds
Chair,
like Commissioner Deerdeck is willing to straighten that out and send something to Elizabeth. And we have that happen before. I'm sure you have that happen in other meetings, Elizabeth, where
yes, once or
members will
twice.
get you corrections even in advance of the meeting. So if you see something like that, again, Commissioner Deerdeck, we can try to get that handled.
Yeah.
in
The
advance.
easiest way to do it would be for Commissioner Deerdeck to send me how he wants it to read, and I'll attach that or put that
Okay.
into the minutes.
Okay, and Pat has her hand up.
Yes, I was gonna say, if the issue was the microphones not catching everything, it's probably an issue on the YouTube also, so it's probably better for Commissioner Deerdeck to.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. It may not have caught it on YouTube either, so that's why I asked him to say how he would like it.
Okay,
think-
why don't
I
we
think if
approve
we
our
did it-
minutes then at the next meeting? If someone would like to make a motion to.
Commissioner
Yeah,
Blondis
for our
and
next-
Commissioner Blondis and Commissioner Ortiz have their hands up.
Yeah. Commissioner Ortiz, I think, beat me to the draw here.
Okay, I think Aaron had a comment about,
I would just say that, how about we let Chair Long recognize people? I think because I think otherwise we're going to have confusion about who gets to recognize people.
everyone wants to talk.
That's- I didn't mean to. I just didn't think she saw him.
No, I do. And I will go to Commissioner Ortiz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just also want to mention that towards the end of the meeting, there was some conversation and some concurrence that we submit the financial portion key to the attorney during the interim. This was at the last meeting, so that we could have it on the agenda for this week. And I think that's important because that reflected some movement and some concurrence on action to be taken. And I think that should be in the minutes. And I made those comments. So.
All right, so
let's-
if you could provide that to Elizabeth as well.
Okay, I will. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Blondis?
Madam Chair, I believe we need some sort of motion to postpone the approval of the minutes. Do we just let it hang, or do we want to go on record that due to the need for, or due to an issue with technology and poor reception, that parts of the minutes are missing and that we need to approve them at the next meeting? Should we have something on record to that effect?
It'll be the entire minutes, but Aaron, what is your suggestion?
I had my hand up about a different potential thing. So
Oh.
I've got a couple people in the waiting room. Alex, if I have ITT Zoom test, am I supposed to let them in? That's their name.
No, Aaron, that one's just us testing it. Sorry.
Okay. Okay. And then I do have a phone number. We don't anticipate that Sarah would be arriving on a phone, do we?
I have not heard that.
Yeah. Okay. Hopefully she would text somebody. that were the case. But you could certainly do a motion to postpone approval of the minutes to our next meeting. That's absolutely
Would
fine.
someone like to make that motion?
I can do that.
Commissioner Blondes, is there a second? Commissioner Montoya? Let's do a roll call to postpone the minutes to our next meeting.
Okay, writing. Commissioner Blundes,
Yes,
Commissioner Deerdeck,
Aye.
Commissioner Granillo,
Yes.
Commissioner Ives,
Yes,
Commissioner Montoya,
yes,
Commissioner Ortiz,
Yes.
Commissioner Pettis,
Yes,
Chair Long,
Yes,
motion passes.
okay. Next on my agenda, I have presentation, but I don't think there's anything under presentation, so we'll go to public comment. Number 6, is there anyone? I know we received a written public comment. You all should have received that from the Old Santa Fe Association's Mr. Johnson. And I will state that I did receive it and I did read it. And is there any other, I think that was the only written comment. Is there any comment anyone would want to make today?
There's Mr. Johnson has his hand up in the Zoom attendee room, so I can
Okay.
allow him to speak, and then I will see if the phone number person, we can investigate who that might be and just to find out.
Right.
So starting with Mr. Johnson.
Okay. All right, Mr. Johnson, we see that you have joined us. You may go ahead with your comments.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Thank you. And I'll keep this brief. Members of the commission, Madam Chair, I just want to thank you for your work on this. I acknowledge that you acknowledge receipt of that. I did want to note that I would have normally submitted this through the portal, and the system through PrimeGov where you click the button didn't function properly. So I did alert the staff to that. I just wanted to alert the commission members of that because obviously public comment is something that you are seeking. But it appears to have gone through the correct channels and arrived. I don't have much more to say about that except that this does represent my latest thinking on this issue of the quasi-judicial process. So if any of the commissioners have not had a chance to read that, I do encourage you to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and that is it for the public comment.
Let me try to let this other number talk
Sure.
in case they would like to. So this is number 505-301-310-1120.
Okay.
The phone number that's here, if you'd wish to talk, you may speak now. We can't tell if you're a member of the public wishing to speak or not. But if you are, now's an opportunity.
I believe you dialed 9 to unmute yourself.
And then I'm also asking to unmute as an option here. But yeah, I think if they're on a phone, it might be easier to do the dial 9.
9.
So it looks like they might not wish to speak. So that's fine as well. So
Yeah,
I can,
they're watching the meeting and that's fine.
and
Okay.
if you did intend to speak and want to raise your hand, is that also a 9, Pat? Do you know? There might be instructions for Zoom that you could find to raise your hand as well. Okay.
Okay.
That's all we've got.
All right, we'll move on to our action items discussion. First is the Subcommittee on Governance Issues and Financial Audit. And they have a number of topics, including the appropriate number of city council districts, the appropriate number of city councilors per district, whether a city councilor who has lost a campaign for mayor should be permitted to remain in office after the inauguration of a new mayor, whether the charter should dictate the city's board and commission organization, whether the city's mayor should have a purely executive role rather than both legislative and executive roles, and if so, what new rights and limitations should be adopted along with such a separation of powers, whether councilors should be full-time, whether the roles of mayor, councilors, and city managers should be better defined, and if so, how, whether the charter should address additional financial management matters, and we will talk about that later on the agenda as well. Whether the charter's requirement for the public rights of referendum initiative should be modified, and whether the charter's requirements for recall should be modified. I'll turn it over to the chair of that committee, Commissioner Deerdak, and I appreciate that. I know some of these matters you had organized very well out of this committee, as some that you would present proposals on and some that would be recommendations to the council in the report. But if you could go over those again, I think it would be helpful. So we can categorize them and we may organize these differently on the next agenda based on that.
Thank you. We met as recently as yesterday, and we made fine edits to a few of the materials that we had already prepared for one another in the subcommittee. As I understood our process discussed at our last commission meeting, I forwarded all of it to Pat, who, as I understand it, Pat intends to review it on our behalf. And if indeed she and we agree that it is ready to come to the chair for the agenda in March 30th, that'll happen. And presumably that can all transpire quickly. So the committee's textual work on each item is done as far as we know. It could very well be that council will help us see places that ordinance or law requires some adjustment, and we'll learn of that soon. If and when we do, we'll make those adjustments and then forward it, Chair Long, to you. Nancy, are you agreed to that process? I think that's the way I understand it.
Yes, that makes sense to me.
Okay, fair enough. Having said that, I think we already heard from Lily May that we as a full commission took the action on our second item. This is the second in our list. That's the second item, because we isolated 3 items where we actually want to make substantive recommendations for alteration of the charter. And this is the second of those. It's extensive. And Lily May presented it at the last commission meeting, and the full commission asked that it be shown to council and then forwarded to the full commission for discussion at today's meeting. And all that has happened.
So when you say second item, then that is the
financial management.
Financial audit.
That's
Financial and audit issue. Okay.
Correct. So let me go back and cover the 2 items of recommendation for charter amendment that have also been forwarded. The first is what the council called referrals D and F, and what you have on your agenda as your E as in Edward, whether the city's mayor should have a purely executive role, that one. And then your G, whether the roles of mayor, councilor, and manager should be better defined, that one. So we are treating both of those in tandem because they cover the same subject matter. And you have heard me on this in the past. What we did was devised a way to carry all of the items in the present charter in a different form, in a form that begins with the legislative branch of government, then goes to the executive branch of government, and concludes with the judicial branch of government. That's a format that American public understands because they see it elsewhere in all parts of government. We made very few changes in substance to the particular branches. We carried through the material that's in the current charter. We made some slight variations in sequence for the sake of emphasis, and we drew a more clear distinction between the two executive roles of mayor and city manager. We followed the model city charter, where it uses the word administration in ways that we believed to be confusing. It puts administration in the mayor's portfolio and then in a different way in the manager's portfolio, while trying to distinguish between them. And so we suggested different language so that it is clear that one role is a CEO role and the other role is a COO role. And we believe that American readers understand that distinction better than using the same nomenclature in both places. Finally, we followed the model city charter in that it expects the mayor to, in its words, be the facilitator in chief of the major issues of the city. And therefore, it insists that the city manager be the manager of the detail of government. The model city charter has quite a paragraph which we cite and repeat in our written proposal that you will see, where it describes the difference between a mayor who leads the city towards solutions of its major issues versus a manager that sees to the detail of current operations quite specifically. And the model city charter goes at some length to say that in places that try to put both of those functions into one function or the other suffers. And so our executive branch of government contains those two roles. And what you will see in the text is that we describe them differently and draw the appropriate distinction. Having said all that, one way to embody that distinction is that the mayor, in our view, is not the presiding officer of the city council. The city council is the legislative branch. That's the Article 1 branch of government. And the executive branch is the second article of government. And in that case, the mayor is obligated to send messages to the council on the mayor's view of major issues. And the mayor is perfectly entitled to amend her or his messages when necessary and appropriate after hearing the council's discussion. But other than that, the council should select its presiding officer. Finally, there is quite a section that describes the obligation of the manager to bring budget proposals and process those budget proposals with the council. It's not the mayor's function, it's the manager's function. And in doing that, we appreciate very much the material that Lily May has already showed to you that describes 3 different financial documents: the annual operational budget, a financial plan that is multi-year and within which annual budgets function. That's a second financial document. And the third is capital, the capital plan for the city. The beauty of the material that Lily May already cited is that one piece of it, one element of it that we particularly appreciated is that when financial matters are brought forward, the charter amendment would describe the public engagement in the development of those matters. And that is why it is constitutional in nature, so that the public that votes on it knows that this is the way they are engaged, and that the elected officers of the city know that this is the way the public expects to be engaged. And the public engagement is different from operational to capital. And that's all cited. I think I have hit the high points of that part of the proposal. And I'm going to move on to the other parts, but I'll pause for a moment in case my colleagues want to add all of the things that I neglected.
You did a good job, Commissioner.
I agree. Nothing to add, Commissioner.
It happens occasionally. I'm going to move
Commissioner
forward.
Ortiz, did you want to add something?
I did.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Paul does a wonderful job. He's just so articulate and expresses and summarizes quite well our conversations. So I really appreciate his work. But I think I mentioned at the very beginning of our meetings, and I think it bodes to mention again, the financial management section that we've included wasn't one of the elements that were sent to us by the city council to work on. And we brought this up and we're basing this on community comments. The citizens of Santa Fe made comments regarding the importance of financial stability, the fact that our audits have not been done for 3 years. And there was some concern about that. So we felt because of that, if your finances are healthy and your books are healthy, then the city is healthy or any organization is healthy. So we felt it important to include into the Constitution. And so that's one of the reasons why we pulled this forward and look for models to insert to make sure that this is elevated. This financial issue is elevated to the level that it needs to be to assure that all the government structures, all of the different branches are addressing it and providing the check and balances that they need to make sure that the work of the city finances is in order and consistently managed. So I just wanted to add that again, even though we have said that before, but thank you, Paul. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I think just for clarification, the issue of the finances and audit was one that the commission voted to include, but I don't see it in the resolution that came to us from the council.
Correct.
Okay. All right, go ahead and
All right.
continue with your report.
Thank you very much. When you see the report, you will see that we structured it so that each referral to us is reported with a scrupulously identical format. So you will see in every case a one-sentence action item followed by a short description of the recommendation, and then the full recommendation, and then commentary. And so we did that because in the model charter, we found that to be a very helpful structure that they use. And so we recommend it, and you will see it reflected. I'm going next to the third item where we are actually making recommendation to change the charter. This is the one that has to do with signature thresholds. There are 3 places where there is a threshold described for signatures that need to be collected to get an item on the ballot. They are initiatives, referenda, and recall. What you will see is that on initiatives and referenda, our current charter calls for 33 1/3% of those who voted in the most recent mayoral election. Mm-hmm. It also calls for a distribution of those signatures among all the districts, that at least 10% need to of the electors need to be represented coming out of each of the districts. We looked at evidence of initiative and recall as it exists elsewhere in political life. And we also noticed that voters don't have access to their ballot. The ballot belongs to them, but don't have access to it on matters of direct action on policy, either by initiative or by referendum. And so in that case, we thought that Santa Fe ought to represent a threshold that is typical of more political life across the country. And there, we found research that has been done that describes how initiatives and referenda are handled. At minimum, they call for 2%, but many of them call for 15%. We could find none that call for 33% when it comes to referenda and initiatives. Therefore, our recommendation is that at the two places in our charter where the threshold is cited as 33%, initiative and referenda, that be modified to 15. On the other hand, when it comes to recall does have an option for the voters. The voters can handle their concerns about a particular office holder, and that is to vote differently the next time that office is on the ballot. And for that reason, it is our recommendation to you that you retain the Santa Fe charter language that calls for 33%. We have seen cases around the country where the option for recall is used just excessively and grinds government to a halt. Recall should be rare. It is extreme and should be rare. And because because the person involved has been elected, and because that office will be up for election very soon, we believe that the 33% is appropriate in the case of recall. So, Madam Chair, those are the three items where we are proposing alteration to the charter. And again, you'll see a few paragraphs of explanation about them. And Maria, thank you very much for providing some text that was really very helpful.
So if I understand your report, that sounds like maybe it's already been completed and will be worked on prior to our next meeting. It will list and take up all of the items that were referred to us and then onto your subcommittee, and the reason for not recommending any charter amendment or revision, and the reason for perhaps including it as a matter to take up in some other way, but not in the charter.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct in all cases.
Well, that sounds like a very good format that you've come up with.
Do you think, Madam Chair, that you would like me to continue verbally through all of them? Or are you content to see them in writing prior to the next meeting and have a thorough discussion of them there?
Well, if anyone has any questions about any of the items on your list, I will just invite them to ask those now. But I think if that's your report, that's handles it well from my point of view.
All right.
Okay, Commissioner Ives.
You're muted, Peter. Thanks.
I've taken myself off there. Thank you, Madam Chair. I had not having the other proposed changes to look at today, but appreciating the comments, had looked at the financial management section summary. And two things came to mind. One, and this may be true for these other sections, which is why I bring it up now rather than waiting for the later discussion on the fiscal management proposal. Our city does not necessarily operate and has not operated according to the model charter and its various rules and procedures, which in my mind raised the question of understanding some of how the changes that are being proposed would affect current practice. So, for instance, and again, because I had fiscal management, the preparation of the budget under the current charter is allocated to the mayor, and the mayor brings that forward. So there would be changes presumably needed beyond the fiscal management to other sections of the charter. And for me, it would be helpful to understand what is being proposed differs from what is currently done. So we have that comparison to really understand. And then also a more complete assessment of what other sections within the charter might be impacted by the proposed changes. So really looking for a little bit what I would describe as more background information for the nature of the change from current practice, and then also what other provisions within the charter are necessarily going to be amended and how by the proposed changes. So it's, I mean, that's, and I imagine those are questions that the council would be likely to ask, given their familiarity with current practice. And I'm going on the basis of the practice at the time I was a counselor, and knowing the job of the Finance Committee and Public Works in preparing capital issues, the Finance Committee preparing the budget, those types of things. So a thought, a request, and then had a few more items just when we get to the financial management piece later on in our discussion. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay, any further questions of this subcommittee on governance? Yes. Commissioner Wong.
Madam Chair and Commissioner Deerda, I know that you mentioned in the minutes that you are consolidating 5 through 8 into a 5. Can you elaborate on that? How is that going to, are you just simply renumerating, eliminating? Are you editing? What are you doing?
Thank you. There's not very much editing. It is changing sequence, and and we leave the question of numbering. The numbering needs to be consistent with the entire charter, and it seems to us that is something that professionals should do, and we rank amateurs are ill-equipped to make the numbering consistent throughout the entire document. But we do in our draft distinguish very well in an outline form what is first level, second level, third level of each section. So that's not going to be confusing to you, I'm quite sure. And part of the response to your question is the response to Commissioner Ives as well. And that is that we follow the procedure that you all have discussed, that everything that is to be, that we suggest be deleted is struck through, and everything we suggest to be added is underlined. And you will see that when the financial portion implicates the portion of the balance of powers and separation of powers, that will reflect back and forth that way. And I think that will handle particularly the single item that Commissioner Ives mentioned, but also Commissioner Blondis. We propose that there be an article, whatever its number, that is called governance, and that it begins with a sentence that says that this city is governed by the present charter, and specifically by the separation and balance of powers among the 3 branches of government. That's the sentence. And it cites those 3 branches by name. And having done that, it then takes them in sequence, begins with the citation of the branch, and then mentions the particular office or body that is implicated, whether it is the legislature or the executive branch. And then I mentioned already the 2 professionals that are in that category. And then at the end, the judicial branch, and it refers to the municipal judge. And so it is, frankly, reading the present charter de novo and knowing something just from high school about how governments are put together, it's a little hard to navigate. That was our impression of it. And it's hard to understand whether the city is a mayor that has a legislative and a judicial afterthought or footnote. I'm sorry to put it so bluntly, but a person who reads our charter without having experienced political life in the city will simply find that terribly confusing, I'm quite sure. And so we hope that the work we've done lends greater clarity and visibility.
And if I could follow up, I noticed in the charter that under the title mayor, there's certain requirements, and under the next title, will those somehow be generalized?
No,
Or
they
specified?
will all be there as specifically as they are today.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that report. Are there any other questions of this subcommittee? So it sounds like we are on track for the commission to consider the recommendations in your report at our next meeting.
That is my belief.
Yes, Aaron?
I was just going to clarify. I thought I heard earlier, and I just wanted to make sure I heard something right, that you're planning to send those to someone on my team for any sort of legal feedback you might want in advance.
I already did.
Okay, because I'm not sure my team has it. I was texting with them.
Receive anything from you, Paul?
I sent it last night.
I don't have it.
All right, I'll send it again.
Okay, so I just wanted to flag that just to make sure we would get it if
Thank
you already
you.
sent it. So thank you.
Aaron, should I send it to both of you?
It's fine, just as long as it gets to one of us. So if Pat doesn't get it within the next 24 hours, if she can get it to me, I guess too. I was just gonna alert. So in terms of 3 branches of government, I do want to just kind of raise one flag. We don't really have a co-equal judiciary in local government. You know, they only have limited jurisdiction to criminal misdemeanor. So that just like that's a very different construct than state or federal government in terms of them being a balancing power to. So just to put that framework out there. So I don't want to spend a lot of time trying to create something like that where it's not possible. So that kind of thing, I just want to flag early so we don't go too far down trying to do that.
Thank you very much. We explored the entrance to that rabbit hole and decided we did not want to live in that rabbit hole any more than you do. And I think you'll be happy with the result.
Okay, excellent. I just don't think that we're allowed to. So we might need some constitutional changes at the state level. So awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Pettis.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to follow up with the statement that was just made. So and remind this commission that we'd agreed that we would have like a 2-week period for public comment on the document. So our subcommittee has submitted or is in the process of submitting our work to council. And then are we still thinking that the full, like both subcommittees reports, if you will go to the public, will be available to the public for review after our March 30th meeting? Thank you.
Yes, it'll be, it sounds like it'll be a bit in advance of the meeting when our materials go up with the agenda. And then presumably action will be taken at that meeting. So then there will be, and we can get comment on it on that meeting as well, or at our meetings in our next meeting in April, if there is any comment on what has been voted on to recommend to the council. I think that was our sort of our path forward.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just want to make sure that there's that we don't vote on something and then that there's no flexibility to really amend something if we get feedback from the public. Thank you.
Okay, that's a good point. Okay, let's hear from the Subcommittee on Human Rights and Social Issues. Commissioner Ives.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we continue in looking at the issues, doing some research on other paradigms for such work around the country, but do anticipate having submissions presumably into Marcos as the attorney working on matters from this subcommittee prior to the next meeting, so that that can be provided as well. Our format may be a little different than the one provided by the Governance Committee on Financial Management, as some of the issues we are looking at don't really fall within the model charter per se, which really doesn't have a policy statement segment in it, but which obviously our charter does, and which personally I think is very healthy. But we do anticipate having informational materials behind and in support of the various proposed changes that are made. So we continue in that process, and as I say, we'll submit it to Marcos once we have it in hand before bringing it to the commission as a whole. We did spend time at our last meeting discussing an item that was of concern to the committee, which was public engagement. And we certainly recognize that what is proposed is to develop these proposals and then see public input. The charter itself is somewhat silent on the charter process, the timing of it, any budgetary issues, et cetera. And I think it was the sense of the committee that we are likely to try and provide, as part of the human rights and social issues aspect of the committee, some potential amendments to Article 10, which is charter review and amendment. The actual charter review 10.01 simply says that the review commission shall be appointed as needed, but not less frequently than every 10 years. The governing body shall by resolution determine the manner of appointment of the commission, provided that there shall be an odd number of commissioners. So it doesn't really address the issues, the public engagement process, the length of time that it would be prudent or perhaps important to have a charter review commission sitting in order to do what I would describe as the sense of the committee, a more robust job in engaging the public and understanding some of the parameters of that public engagement and trying to get word out and get input in. So some of that is simply an expression of a little bit of frustration by committee members with regards to our process, and that we really haven't been able to significantly engage the public. And having been a city councilor and heard many folks complain always that, well, you haven't taken any input, notwithstanding public meetings, there's clearly some disconnect between people's perception of an opportunity to participate and simply holding a meeting like this, which is open to the public. So wanted to let folks know that that was the sense of the committee on some of those issues. And so that we would anticipate also addressing potentially some changes to that section of the charter under the social issues and human rights, i.e. participation in the charter process. So with that, I would invite other committee members to weigh in and fill in what I have forgotten.
Any other committee members want to weigh in?
Madam Chair, hold on. I believe that Peter summed it all up, and I just wanted to second that I probably was the one that brought up a lot of this concern about the committee not being able to reach out to the community. When I joined, I wanted to see if we could do more community engagement based on the relationship, so that it's not just about our ideas of what we want to change, but however, some of the things that we want to implement is some of the things that the people need, because if I can't hear what my people need, then there is that's the point of being a public servant for me. And so I would like to engage in that part a little bit more, the community engagement part. Doing the writing and checking and changing, I know there's super substantial importance to it. However, that's just my stance on it. But I appreciate everything Peter did and summed it up. You did a great job, my friend.
Thank you. And I would also note that in the resolution creating this commission, again, it does note that the public is invited to provide comments, suggestions as to potential charter amendments, and to really engage in a robust process that honors that capacity. Probably takes more than the last month and a half of the process to be recognized as something that is real and significant. So,
Yes.
thank you, Madam Chair.
We do have some time constraints, that is for certain. And I assume that there will be, public process on the other side when it goes to the council. And there's a recommendation there, and depending on what the council decides to take up, there's not a lot of time either, but that will again be in the public eye. Yes, Commissioner Blondis.
I would like to thank Commissioner Ives also, and I certainly am on board with what JP was just discussing. Our public representative, folks, is Adam Johnson. And Mr. Beckel, that's two people, and that's very disturbing to me. And I appreciate, Chair Long, what you're saying is that there will be public input on the other side after we make our recommendations. But where we really need engagement is now, because we're deciding, those of us on this screen, for the whole city. That's pretty remarkable. And I think I've voiced this in the past, where are the residents of Santa Fe, and how do we get them to engage? And we aren't being successful, and that's disturbing to me.
Okay. All right, and I wanted to ask this committee how the chart resolution and perhaps the creation of this office, we talked about it some last time, of equity and inclusion, how that is factoring into your review.
I'm not muted. If I might, we're certainly aware of the chart resolution and had obtained copies of it, and I think everybody has looked at it. I think the committee itself, in reviewing that, noted that 75% or so of that resolution was actually directed to the Soldiers Monument, and certainly don't want to get into a discussion of the merits of any statements in the resolution, as I suspect many opinions differ, as was probably evidenced by at the city council meeting last night. And so we understand that there is certainly likely, regardless of whether or not a human rights commission is created, the need for ordinances that address these issues. We do think that this is, again, significant enough an issue that it should be something the people of Santa Fe should be able to weigh in on, given the significance of human rights discussions and issues both locally, regionally, across the United States and around the world. So we do see that as a certainly significant component that obviously has a lot of flesh to be put on the bones that are put forward in the resolution, but don't see that as a prohibition to acting to try and create a human rights commission. And
All right, Commissioner Wanda's.
Yep.
Thank you.
And thank you, Commissioner Chair Long and Commissioner Ives. I agree with what you are saying. A concern that I have voiced, and in fact, I've recently sent out some information to the committee. An office can come and go depending on the administration, depending on the priorities, depending on the future. And to see stated within the charter that a human rights commission reflects a commitment on the part of the city of Santa Fe for equity, and to have the people then take a position on that through voting, I think would lay a very solid foundation out into the future that equity is important to the city of Santa Fe, and human rights around us, which surround that whole concept, and that the city of Santa Fe is going to be reflecting on everything they do through that equity lens. And I think that's very important. Thank you.
Thank you. And Commissioner Pettis, I know you've had your hand up. I didn't
Thank
mean
you,
to
Chair.
skip over you.
I wanted to follow up on what my colleagues were talking about, the public input and the civic engagement piece of this. I do democracy work in my day job, and I'm familiar with how some other cities do their charter review process. And I have to say that, you know, having 4 or 5 months, having one of those months be December, it just does not give us time to even check that box as a gesture, right? The public engagement thing, I really would hope that our city takes the public engagement, the public input, the dialogue with the public seriously. And in matters such as this, we're talking about really wonky stuff. We're talking about in the weeds policy stuff. And it's not just a matter of sharing a Google Doc with the public, or, you know, it really requires dialogue, conversation. It requires being in partnership with community organizations that work with different constituencies. And there's more time that is required. Like, there needs to be a translation, right, of the kinds of things that we're talking about to what that means in community and then back. And that requires resources in terms of staffing time and time. But I think it's so very important, and we can't just like check the box and say like, oh, we had public meetings, right? Like, there's no effort to really make this content accessible and work with the public to have that dialogue. So my hope is that there will be some sort of recommendation about that, and that it could be part of the charter. Like, we take public engagement seriously, and these are some steps that we'll take to make sure that these different constituencies have access to the information in ways that are, you know, culturally appropriate, and that have the opportunity to really engage in dialogue and not just respond to stuff. So that's my little 2 cents there. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, Aaron.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioners. I was going to say this during matters from staff, but since it's relevant right now, I'm in the process of putting together an email on materials to load to our website, as we had discussed at a prior meeting. Obviously, that's a small step, but if there are specific things the commission wants to do, I don't think we're precluded from anything. Certainly, it's not in our charter yet, so I think that's something that could be looked at to require certain types of public engagement. But I don't think there's anything we're precluded from at this point. So if there are specific measures you'd like me to ask the city manager or the city clerk to assist with, I think it should be something the commission votes on that you want to do as a measure rather than individuals, but I'm certainly happy to facilitate that.
Thank you. That's helpful. Did you have another comment on that, Commissioner Pettis?
No, let me.
Okay.
raise my hand. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next, new topics for consideration by the commission. I did want to let the commission know that I did visit with Pat about the last comment that we received from Mr. Johnson. I know he's updated that somewhat, so we did not discuss that one in any detail, but I think the point of it was very similar, and that was the issue of ex parte communications being objected to, the 2-minute time period for comments from the public on land use matters and whether they had to be quasi judicial. I know Pat did bring to the attention of the commission and Mr. Johnson that Chapter 14 is undergoing revisions, perhaps where some of these issues could be raised. I know that's a long process, as Commissioner Ives pointed out, but it is one vehicle for that. I think that the issue and maybe the problem is with this topic is that the quasi judicial overlay for land use cases, whether they're subdivisions or variances and exceptions, as Mr. Johnson has recently described, are really prescribed by Supreme Court and Court of Appeals decisions, and that prohibits the ex parte contacts, and that provides for a more structured, I would say, kind of hearing on those matters. So there's probably not a lot of latitude. There certainly could be some movement on rules regarding, time limits and that sort of thing. And maybe the standards for some of these cases, whether it's, variances or exceptions, that would be something that would be within Chapter 14. So that's kind of where we came out, is that I think, if I'm representing that right, Pat, that there really wasn't a good way to do it in the charter, and there were some other avenues available and some would not be available, just because it wouldn't be allowed by law. We can talk again about Mr. Johnson's latest letter, but that was one new topic that has been brought up by Mr. Johnson at the last few meetings.
Chair Long, yes, I think that is what I got out of our conversation. This certainly is important, but it's not necessarily charter related.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Commissioner Blondis.
Yes, thank you, Chair Long. In looking through the charter and the section on environment, as I was reading through that section again, and the last sentence, which was an amendment from 2014, involved development with, I don't have it right at hand, but anyway, development tied into water availability. And as I read it, I I don't believe it is definitive enough. It's the last sentence in, it comes right after human rights. I'm sorry, I had it open and now I'll never find it. I closed the book. I believe that last sentence, in the section on environment is not specific enough and should read something, more like manage development based on current data that gives information about the true availability of water, and it's tied into development. That last sentence that was just tagged on at the end, and I feel that it could be tightened. And I think it's something that's worth at least a pass over in that section. Let's see, I'll find it. All right. I do have it. Let me get it. The sentence reads in section 2.03, because water quality and availability are extremely important to the citizens of Santa Fe, the governing body shall protect, preserve, and enhance the city's water resources through regulation, conservation, and relating development to water availability. That last phrase, relating development to water availability, to me seems very open-ended. And so I just reading it over, I would say management of development based on current data showing water availability and sustainability. In other words, tightening that statement. And I don't know if that's appropriate, but it seems somehow that if we're going to mention water in the charter, we need to be more specific. And leaving it open-ended like that opens up interpretation. And does that open up interpretation to the benefit of the developer? That's my concern. And I don't know if that would fall under our subcommittee or if we need to vote to even consider that, or what the commission thinks about that. But that was one item, and only that caught my eye, that disturbed me, that it was too vague.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think any new topics should be voted on by the commission as a whole, and then we could refer it to a subcommittee. And I don't know if you wanted to pose that at this time. I mean, I think it's, if you have it framed as you want, or that's something you wanted to bring back.
Yes, I would like to ask that the commission consider the importance of specificity when it comes to development and water conservation.
Okay, so I'll take that as a motion. Is there a second to include that? Or for discussion? Yes. Commissioner Ives will second.
I had to take myself off mute. Certainly second for discussion,
Okay.
and happy to weigh in.
And I guess Commissioner Blondis, I see it as specific in that it relates development to water availability, and that the governing body shall protect, preserve, and enhance the city's water resources, which sounds to me like a charter kind of a statement, that's the policy. And then there are ways that the city does implement that. So I don't know that I would be in favor of anything more specific, but others might be. Is there any other discussion? Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can certainly confirm that the city water department, as well as our various ordinances, do take into account water availability in connection with development. It might be helpful before voting on this to understand what those are better, because if a development is of a certain size, it's required to bring wet water in. That has its own implications in terms of acquisition of water rights and the like. If it is for affordable housing, the city's water banking program will, and for small developments, will make water available. Whether or not all of that is striking the right balance is, I think, the sort of heart of the question that Commissioner Blondis is looking at. And it's a fairly complex picture in terms of existing ordinances and regulations. Additionally, there's a whole planning process involved, for instance, in the water reuse pipeline that has a potential to solve certain problems depending on the availability of San Juan Chama water. So it would be wonderful, and I know Marcos is involved in a lot of water issues, I believe. And so it might be helpful before trying to really consider it, just to see those ordinances, see those regulations, and understand that relationship better. I will say I have had a former general counsel for the state engineer's office in a casual conversation on the street regarding various developments in the county, posed the question, where's the water coming from? So it's certainly a valid question, and it's becoming more valid as climate change impacts our surface water resources significantly. So that would be my recommendation, and perhaps we put it on the agenda for next meeting, but try and have those various provisions in hand to be able to understand how that's addressed currently.
So you're saying, Commissioner Ives, to have some sort of a presentation on that issue to see how it's addressed before we.
That would certainly be helpful, but also circulate out the various statutory ordinances and regulations that address that issue at the city level before the meeting.
All right, Commissioner Ortiz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm still listening and trying to embrace and understand the validity of that and how that would look. And I agree we should wait to bring something forward to the next meeting. But I just flipped to our city charter, and there's an environmental protection section that has a sentence almost what you said, Madam Chair. Talks about water quality and availability. They're extremely important to the city of Santa Fe. The governing body shall protect, preserve, and enhance the city's water resources through regulation, conservation, and relating development to water availability. So I'm not sure what we're trying to get. And I just quickly pulled off the charter and found that sentence. And so maybe if we looked at the whole charter, we might find what we're getting at. There's a lot of elements in the city that are important and valuable that we need to raise, but are they all charter issues that we as a charter commission at this moment in time have to take on and carry a flag for? Is it critical and important? And is there nothing in our current charter that doesn't attempt to address that and highlight it. So I'm just throwing those out for consideration because I'm still trying to understand what we're asking here. So I don't believe we're ready to vote on that because I wouldn't know how to vote at this point on that one statement. So that's all, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments on this? So did you perhaps want to have a vote on it, or do you want to withdraw the motion at this time?
Well, not being an expert in the city or the commission's parliamentary procedure, perhaps we just bring it to a vote, and if it and I think the motion was more investigative. I'm just basing it on public input. So I've heard and been approached as Commissioner Ives by people who are very concerned about development versus water availability. And that sentence, Commissioner Ortiz, was the one I actually read out of the charter and added on to that you were looked through the charter and found. So I guess bring it to a vote. If it passes, fine. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
Okay, so could we, yes.
Commissioner Long, I'm sorry, I
Commissioner
just want to say before we go to a formal vote that I do agree that and I just want to say it before we get to the vote, that I do feel like we need more information. The information that Commissioner Ives suggested we evaluate. And so for that reason, that is why I will vote to not study it at this point, because I do feel like we need more information. And I just wanted to be clear about why I'm voting the way that I'm voting.
Okay, so could we hear your, yes, Commissioner Deerdeck?
It would be helpful to me to hear someone read the motion again before we vote.
Okay, let's hear the motion. If you can restate that, Commissioner Blondis.
Well, you would like me to? I thought maybe that the transcriber would read it.
I think we've lost her.
Oh dear. Wow, because how did I state it exactly? I think I think that I would like to at least the concept is I would like to at least look at this last sentence, which is vague, in relation to I would like to make this a topic, because I would like to at least get some information that would support the final phrase of that statement in the charter, which just simply says relating to development and water availability. So I would like to study this to ascertain if indeed it is specific enough as written in the charter. That's what I want to do.
Okay, Commissioner Deerdeck.
Are we voting to refer the matter back to committee for further study so that it comes to us with expert witness? Is that the question before us?
Is that your motion?
Yes,
Commissioner
I think
Blondis?
Commissioner
Refer this matter
Deerdeck is much better at stating it. Yes.
to the subcommittee on human rights and social issues, maybe.
Mhm.
And since your liaison there would know something about this, Marcos, then you could hear about it. Okay, is
Thank you,
that
yes.
acceptable to the second, Commissioner Ives? Okay, any other discussion on the motion to refer this to that committee for further study and to come back to us? All right, then I will do a roll call. Commissioner Ortiz?
No, and I'd like to explain my vote.
Okay. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, you want me to do it now? Okay. I think what I heard is already outlined in the current charter, only different words were used. Land, anyway, so I'm voting no. I think it's already there.
Okay. Commissioner Dudak,
Yes.
Commissioner Blondis,
Yes.
Commissioner Ives,
Yes.
Commissioner Granillo,
Yes.
Commissioner Pettis,
Yes.
Commissioner Montoya.
Yes, yes, and I will explain with the explanation from Commissioner Deerdak that the subcommittee is going to gather the information that Commissioner Ives recommended we study. That makes sense to me in terms of bring up time as a commission as a whole and hearing from the subcommittee. So I vote yes.
Okay. And I will vote yes, that it can go to the subcommittee so that you can receive some more information. But I too believe that it is adequately covered in the charter, and that it really sets out a policy statement. But if I need to be corrected on that, I'll listen for it. Okay, any other topics, new topics for consideration that anyone would like to bring up?
And Madam Chair,
Yes.
I mentioned the one with regards to looking at the phraseology relating to Article 10 in the current charter, which is the charter review and amendment, and that the committee would like to look at that and propose some changes to make the public participation portion of any charter review opportunity a bit more robust. So we would certainly like to look at that and propose some potential additions there to get out ahead of the public and with the public in participation. And again, that was contemplated in the resolution that created this commission in the first instance. So on the one hand, it could be considered to be part of the human rights charge, because certainly it involves voting and the sort of city's constitution, but if more formal action were necessary, I would move to make that an additional item for the Human Rights and Social Issues Committee to take a look at and propose changes.
Okay, that's a motion on that topic to send it to the Human Rights and Social Issues Committee on public input to be placed in the charter. Is there a second to the motion? Okay, it is seconded by Commissioner Pettis and some others. Any other discussion? All right, Commissioner Ortiz, what is your vote? I think it was a yes.
Yes, sorry, I was muted. Yes.
Commissioner Dudak,
Yes.
Commissioner Blondis,
Yes.
Commissioner Ives.
Yes.
Commissioner Granillo,
Yes.
Commissioner Pettis,
Yes.
Commissioner Montoya,
Yes.
and I vote yes. All right, we'll see what you come back with. Thank you for reminding me about that topic. Yes, Commissioner Dudak.
I realize that I must have dropped a stitch somewhere and I'm confused. It's not the first time. When we got the material for today's meeting, the material with regard to chart was included. And I thought I understood from Commissioner Ives' report that that was included there because the Subcommittee on Human Rights is looking at social equity, and the social equity institution that's proposed in the chart material was material to the discussion. And if that's the nexus, if that's where the two connect, great. I'm hopeful that when we get into the substance, those of us who are not on your committee, I would like to be heard on this question that's related. The question that that matters to me is that social equity for me is a big category, and that there are stakeholders that I have not heard mentioned in the discussion of social equity heretofore. And frankly, they matter a lot in my view. And so when we get there, either the report that we receive from the committee expands the relevant topic areas of social equity, or in the discussion that we have as a full commission, I will state my opinion about that. But the way I see it reflected in the material that the council is already considering, it does seem to me to suffer from being too narrow. And so I'm simply raising that flag so that you're not surprised when I speak up. Of course, anytime I speak up, everyone's surprised. So there you go.
Right. Aaron, did you have your hand up earlier about why that was included, why the chart resolution?
I did. I had promised to send it to the commission, I think 2 meetings ago. The topic that it was out there came up and I said I could just distribute it. So it wasn't a request from any particular committee or commission member. But it was just something I had promised to send out. There are amendments A through G that have been proposed to it. Those are posted with the governing body packet from last night. None of them have been, well, Amendment A was adopted by one of the committees as it was heading towards governing body. And then Amendment F is being considered. It has been moved as of last night, but that's where the proceedings were paused at 11:30. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, next is consideration of Governance and Financial Audit Subcommittee's proposal regarding financial management. And would you like to present this, Commissioner Ortiz? Or I know we've discussed it already this evening.
I think, Madam Chair, we have presented information on it. It's very straightforward. It is directly out of the model best practice document, so nothing has been deleted in terms of the format and the provisions and the financial management. It contains exactly all the pieces that the best practice model contains. We looked at the current city charter to see what elements that were in this best practice model are already contained, and there were none. There were very few mentions other than the independent audit committee. There were very few mentions in our current charter about finance. They talked about campaign finance. They talked about public campaign financing, campaign contribution limits. These are all financial kinds of issues. Timely disclosure of purposes of tax increases, investments, procurement, and then the last piece was the independent audit committee. So the only thing I think I could add is if the commission chooses to forward this proposal intact, the only adaptation that the city councilors would need to look at doing is incorporating the independent audit committee language that has already been approved, that exists in the current city charter, into this document. And that's just, those are like 5 lines. So there's not a whole lot of language that would need to be incorporated. We didn't focus, I didn't focus on redlining and trying to write in that, because I felt the city council needs to look at this in its current structure, determine if they even want to do it, rather than confusing the issue and adding the 4 sentences for the independent audit committee. So that's a matter of format. Do we format it here before we send it to the city council? Do we send our added language to the city council, and the city council picks and chooses what they want, and then they format the language? That's a process issue that I didn't have an answer to. And so that's how it's presented. That's all.
Okay, are there any questions of the committee on this proposal? Yes. Commissioner Ives.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I had mentioned earlier, section Article 5 in the current charter under the mayor, 5.01M states, work with city personnel under the duties of the mayor. Work with city personnel and timely prepare an annual budget and propose spending priority for review and approval by the finance committee and the governing body. And so that was actually an amendment that had been made effective March 12, 2018. So in the last round of charter amendments. And mind you, I don't have any problem putting that function onto the city manager, as that's, I would agree based upon other comments made that that's an appropriate spot for that to happen, and more likely spreads out the reporting the responsibility of the city manager to not only the mayor, but also to the council for budgetary matters in a more appropriate way. So I don't have problems with the substance, but again, my challenge was there seemed to be other areas within the charter that were necessarily going to need to be amended. Didn't have those. And I know Commissioner Durdock said that that's part of the additional package coming. So I appreciate that. And I just, my one question is, do we want to vote on it? And I have a few other comments. Do we want to vote on it until we see the completeness of that? And so just a question for what we try and accomplish tonight. I note in the item under the section, and it's a blank and then says, or underline underscore 11, independent audit. It has 3 numbered subparagraphs. It says the council shall designate no fewer than 3 of its members to serve as an audit committee. We of course have the audit committee. And so, you know, did you necessarily want to say, forget that audit committee and let's do something entirely new with 3 city councilors? But in the number 1, it talks about the independent auditor. Number 2 talks about the independent auditor, but then number 3 talks about the report of the internal auditor. And I wasn't sure what that distinction was meant. The city does have, or at least when I was a counselor, did have an internal auditor who commissioned and saw audits of various departments and programs over the course of each year, sort of cycling through the entirety of city government on a 3 to 5 year cycle. But I wasn't sure if that was meant to capture that distinction. There was no other mention that I saw of internal auditor. And then finally, you know, obviously some of the big issues we've had with city audits in the last several years, and this had been an issue when I was a city councilor, but we finally got our audits in on time. Is it worthwhile saying anything about the timing of audits and the creating a sense of priority rather than a more laissez-faire approach, notwithstanding the trials of the Tyler computing program to getting our budgets in on time? So those were just some general thoughts and questions for the committee. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, Commissioner Ortiz.
I'd be happy to respond to some of those. In terms of timing, that's the beauty of this best practice model. You'll see as you read through it, there's a lot of places where there's blanks. You put the dates in there. I didn't put the dates now because that's up to the city to do. In terms of when the fiscal years, of course, that's pretty standard. But as you look at the document, there's different places you put dates in. So that holds people firm to those dates. The dates stayed the same every year. They know what's required. So timing is very critical, and I think that's part of the issue why our audits have not been on time. Those dates, those drop dead dates, those timelines have not been adhered to. So that is a real important key, and I'm glad you noticed that. In terms of the internal and auditor and independent auditor, this is mainly addressing the independent auditor. These are the people that come in from contract, trying to comply with the state auditor's requirements that each municipality in the state of New Mexico be audited. And so this is pretty much focusing on independent auditors. Cities can have internal auditors if they choose to. That's an additional person they hire. That internal auditor works for the city. They're not doing independent audits. The independent auditor is on contract providing and following the guidelines that the state auditor requires, is my understanding. Trying to look at my notes in terms of what you mentioned. Oh, in terms of the provision, yes, 505M. We've got that highlighted here. It's not in the notes that you got, but yes, the mayor powers and duties talk about the mayor working with the city councilor. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we didn't redline and change and delete language. We can do that if you want us to do that. And I guess that's a question I have for our attorney. And I think I've asked this before. What kind of format are we sending this to the city councilors? Are we sending this in the format that it looks like a legislative bill? This is current language. These are all the appropriate things. These are the strikeouts. These are the add-ins. And then we pull everything from the current city charter that relates to finances. And it'll be those two sections, section 501M, mayor's powers and duties, and section 904, independent audit committee. We would pull those two sections in there. And so then our document would have redlined, underlined, new language, strikeouts, and look just like a legislative bill. So that's easy to do. I mean, we could do that, overnight because we have the information. We've already talked about that. So that's more of a format question for our attorney, how we want to present these to the city council. Did I catch all of them? I may have missed one of your questions.
You got the questions. I think really what I was just wondering in section number 3, where it says receive the report of the internal auditor, I was more asking, should that read the independent auditor?
No.
Okay.
I think it reads the way it needs to read, because the city needs to have their own people doing the work before you can bring someone in to do an independent audit.
Okay, let's hear from Aaron. I know you've had your hand up too.
Sure, I'll speak to the format issue. So there's no specific requirement there. I think if you were able to do the strike and underline in addition to the reasons for your recommendation, that would be extremely helpful.
Okay.
The reason I'd raise my hand though is a number of these sections are governed by state law, which is probably why they're not in our charter. So in terms of the auditor, that's governed by the state auditor. The mechanism for selecting an independent auditor and the timing and the limitation on numbers of years and all of that. So we can't really do that independent of him. Currently it is him. And then, so also the budget deadline for the state, we are overseen by the Department of Finance and Administration for our timelines for budget. So you might want to consider some of that before you make a final recommendation on this recommendation. And then I think to Councilor Ives' point, it would be interesting to know what the idea is of the committee or the subcommittee as to how the other sections that would be impacted, how they would be impacted. Are we just striking the fact that the mayor submits something, or are we saying anything in terms of his role? And then it might also be helpful to know maybe just the practical nature of how the city's operating on some of these points right now in terms of the finance committee and the independent audit committee, to see if that's something you want to either memorialize or deviate from. Some of these things are also in ordinance. So the finance committee's authority is an ordinance and that kind of thing.
Great points. And some of those items is what we thought when we forwarded it to you, the attorneys, you would look at. I mean, yes, I understand the state auditor has their requirements and the fiscal year is a state fiscal year, and we certainly can fill in the blanks. But I guess I'm wondering if you're suggesting we have to research the state auditors' audit requirements and the
Oh,
line.
I'm sorry, I was just requested to post this. I didn't get any request to provide feedback.
Oh,
Yeah, so I think it does make sense to have our attorneys look at this and provide some feedback through the committee, through the subcommittee that is considering it. And I think all of these points are really helpful for that final review and for further discussion, if that's acceptable to the subcommittee. Yes, Commissioner Diodak.
Beyond acceptable, it's exactly right. But it raises to me a broader question. When the commission finally reports, it seems to me that there's another task that we amateurs are not equipped to do, and that is harmonization. And it could very well be that any of our proposals, not only on this topic, but on others, would have would modify claims that are made elsewhere in the total charter. And we would be ill-equipped to be certain that harmony exists among all the particles of the charter as a whole. In past practice, when there have been charter commissions, was there a step in the process that looked at everything being recommended and did a harmonization exercise throughout the charter to allow all of these additions and changes to be incorporated? Was that done?
It was probably.
I can speak to part of that. I don't know, Chair Long, if you can speak to.
Yeah, I don't. I think it was maybe more haphazard than that. And we caught things that were affected by another section. Certainly when you're making larger changes like you may be doing with governance, there's going to be more of the charter to look at and do this harmonizing that you're talking about, rather than just adding a new sort of section. But Aaron may have some thoughts on that too, but just in terms of the report, I'm looking back at some of the commission's reports from past decades. And it does seem like there is, the preferred format seems to be here's the section, here's what we think should come out, and here's underlining what should come in. So it really is a legislative format to the extent that we can do it, I think is the most helpful. So you can see how the sections interplay and exactly what charter section we're talking about, or adding a brand new one and what section you would put that in. I know it's more work, and some of this may happen, as the final report's being put together, certainly, but that would be the preferred format from what I can see. Aaron, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, just a little bit. There is a requirement that before it goes to the voters that I post a public opinion as to whether or not the proposals are legal. Because I can provide advice or information, and I don't vote on this commission, and I don't vote on the governing body either, obviously. So but I did notice in between, the recommendations from prior commissions and the ultimate questions put forth to the voters, sometimes they're tweaked a little bit. And I think in recognition of something that the governing body either knew was either practice or just they thought would work slightly better. So I think in terms of that could definitely happen, even if the idea itself is, supported by the governing body. Ultimately, they might think a different term or something is more consistent with something else they have in code, or that's something that people are more used to dealing with in the state of New Mexico or something like that. That it might speak to the harmonizing idea as well.
I'm sorry.
Yep, go ahead.
That's exactly what I was hoping would happen. That's exactly it. And so I'm grateful that that's considered a acceptable and common practice. And I think you're going to be happy when you see our proposals 1 and 3. That is exactly how we have constructed them. And the item that that Peter has raised a few times now about what happens to the role of the mayor in the citation of the mayor's duties as a result of this financial and management paragraph. That's been attended to with strikeouts and underlines quite explicitly.
Good job.
It's already there. Yeah.
That's great. It's a lot of work, I know, but I think it's the best way to see it.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so it sounds like if you all are fine with this, then this is gonna go back for some further review to see how it would fit in with the charter. And so we have something specific to really look at as it fits within our charter. But I think you've got the idea there, well formed, and just needs to be further developed. So we won't vote on this one tonight.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
And so was trying to understand the voting of the different pieces. Were we submitting them now? Let me back up. I got the impression we were wanting to start funneling out to our meetings like this first one, the financial management, so that the public could start looking at it. So we're really not ready for a vote now because the public needs to look at it and then we'd be voting multiple times. Wouldn't we submit them for concurrence of we've already voted on the subject matter. The subcommittees are pulling together their expertise and pulling together their best practice information and formatting it in a way that we believe works to be included in the city charter. Wouldn't we continue to put those different pieces out as part of our meetings and hopefully we get more publicity so that the community even knows that we are putting together different pieces so that we can get input. And I guess I envision our voting on this at the very end, once we've had submissions from the subcommittees, conversations by the full commission like we're having this evening, and then the attorneys looking at and saying, oh no, you guys got to change this because that does not align with the state auditor's timeline. Before we vote on this, because we could spend a lot of time voting on these issues, and I think there's too many elements of pieces that we need to incorporate as we move forward to include public comment, commission comment before we get to the final vote. So I mean, that's kind of how I saw us doing this. So
yeah, and I think to the extent that we can have these specific items on the agenda, even have your proposal there that the public can access if they wish to. I think all of that's beneficial, even though we're not ready for a final vote on it. So I think that goal certainly has been accomplished, at least as to this piece of it, if we want to just be more specific about what you all are looking at. But I think getting the reports by the end of March on what the committees are recommending, and then maybe what you're suggesting is we may not necessarily be voting at that time, but we will be discussing them a lot, I am sure. And then we'll be voting on the final report in April and hopefully getting some more input from the public on the items. But yes, either the items have all we've decided to consider them, right? Or the council has told us to consider them. And so, and whether we decide to do anything, and it sounds like the subcommittee certainly on governance is going to come back on some of those items that were referred to us and say, no, we don't have a recommendation here, and here's why. We don't think there should be a charter amendment. So we will have final votes on all of those items.
thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Montoya.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the commission, and really specifically Aaron, given the time frame right now, and for our committee to come with the final recommendations with regard to the financial piece, I'm hoping that we can have your insight so that we can have a subcommittee meeting well in advance of the next commission meeting with your analysis of what's legal, what's not legal, what we can and can't do, so that we have enough time to prepare what in fact we're recommending at the March meeting and end of March meeting. So I guess I'm wondering what the time frame is to hear back from you all on that, as well as the one that Paul is resubmitting to you all this evening.
Thanks for that question. Chair Long, commissioners, I think we can give you high level feedback. What I don't think we can do is that type of rectifying and say, I think we can give you like heads up, there's some sections that need to be changed along with this. And what I'm thinking I'm going to give you is kind of like this whole section is governed by this statute already, that type of thing, for each section. And then I would like to circulate my comments to our budget team too, just to make sure they don't have any feasibility feedback. Although they are preparing the budget right now, so it's a pretty busy time.
Thank
But
you.
I'm sure, I mean, that's gonna be the first question from the governing body is, does this make sense, budget team, right? And I guess it would be nice for you all probably to know as well, right?
Right.
If they're able to give any feedback on that.
Thank you.
Okay, that's great. To get that kind of input. Okay, any other
Madam Chair.
comments on this matter? Yes.
Yes, a quick follow-up to what Aaron just said. Aaron, is there any way that we could get a copy of the budget cycle for the city of Santa Fe? Because if I have the budget cycle, I can plug in those numbers and those dates very easily. Do they have?
So my concern is that it's governed by a different agency.
Agency?
Right, by the state. The State Department of Finance and Administration has a local government division, and they're the ones who actually govern that schedule. And then the city has to figure out how to meet those deadlines.
Okay, so I could walk into local government at DFA and they'll hand me a schedule.
Well, there's a
I
deadline.
think it's in their so it's in their administrative code, I believe, or a
Got it.
guidebook. So that's the type of resource I was hoping to point to.
Okay,
But
no
if-
problem.
Yeah,
I can-
and it might be very helpful because I don't know how significant the document is. I did see it come in from Commissioner Deerdak just now or earlier this meeting. If there's priorities of the, knowing that as well, amongst I don't know how substantial the other proposal is. I mean, this one's several pages and covers multiple topics that are governed by multiple other agencies.
Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Ives.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just based upon time on council, the city regularly tried to approve its following year's fiscal budget at the last city council meeting in May, as it had to be submitted by June 30th, and then it has to be reviewed and approved by DFA. So that was sort of a rough time frame used internally in terms of having a budget that's approved by the governing body that is then submitted to the state. During the Gonzalez administration, we did adopt a resolution on the budgeting process, which called for a budget to be brought forth by the mayor. I can't remember if it was the beginning of March or the beginning of April, but it was one of those two dates. And then basically the finance committee would hold a series of hearings, often consisting of 4 or 5 full days, in which each department at the city would present its budget to the finance committee, which was often attended by the counselors who were not members of the finance committee, in order that they would be fully informed on the budgetary process. That covers the operational budget significantly. The capital budget was more generally looked at by the Public Works Committee, and often got finally approved once the operational budget was done. So in a sort of last minute rush, but there was a continual updating of the ICIP, which is the sort of capital projects listing, 5 of which, the 5 priorities of which have to be submitted to the state annually, I believe in September, so that they can be considered during the legislative session. So yeah, city budget has to go to the state sometime between that last meeting in May and the end of June. it gets reviewed and approved by DFA or rejected. Another possibility, certainly. And it has to be a balanced budget, but internally it's being brought forward either right around this time, and then it would be going to the Finance Committee. The Finance Committee would be holding a series of hearings where the departments would present along with the Department of Finance. And those resolutions should be out there. Whether or not they're still observed, I haven't a clue.
Budgets are a process.
Yes.
And there's a lot of factors that go into it that you're, waiting on more information from one place or another. So I don't know that the timelines are always strictly adhered to, but okay. Is there anything else from staff? I know you've weighed in on a few things this evening, Erin. Is there anything else?
We will try to make the link, or I will try to get the calendar invite out earlier as an Outlook invite for next meeting. It is a virtual meeting for the second meeting in March as well. And then in April, we're scheduled to come back into council chambers. And we'll look into Mr. Johnson's concern about PrimeGov. I'll find out what was going on with that.
Okay.
And I think that's it. So, and then Chair, if you have community engagement things you want me to look into, please let me know.
Okay. If we can talk about that. I was planning I have reached out to the newspapers who said, yeah, they may come and cover it, but I thought maybe a letter to the editor once we have the proposals out the door at the, end of the month, so that I can describe those in the letter. So I'll plan on doing that. And then we can talk about whether there's any other efforts we can make. Is there anything else from the committee?
Madam
Yes.
Chair, just
Commissioner
add
Ives. Oh, let me start with Commissioner Ives. Sorry, Commissioner Ortiz.
Just two quick items. I did have a request from a community member with regards to at-large elections. And so, Erin, I was just hoping you could send me the materials you had prepared on that issue. I think you did that early on in our process. And as I recall, there was some prohibition on doing at-large, or at
You're
least.
talking about an at-large member
Yeah.
of the council. Okay, yeah, there's a memo on that.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I just don't have it, so was hoping
Okay.
it would be resent. I also had a little bit of input from a community member on the Article 2 section on the local economy, wanting to focus on aspects of the creative economy, which is so significant in Santa Fe. So know that I'm having a discussion on that, so I may bring something back as a potential new item to the commission at our next meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Ortiz. You're muted, Commissioner Ortiz.
Yes, sorry, I'm working on two computers here. Madam Chair, I was just going to add to what you were saying about publicizing our work. And I was just going to add the one thing that was so helpful for the Independent Redistricting Commission was on the city's website page, the very front of it, and I'm looking at it now, right under meetings and agendas. We added a link right there on that first page that allowed residents of the city to look at all 5 maps that we were looking at. They just had to hit that and they got to the maps, they got to the background information. It was really quick and easy, very user-friendly. And that's where we got the majority of our people looking at our data. If it was on the front page and they didn't have to figure out to go to meetings and agendas or figure out what the meeting was called. So I'm just throwing that out because that's what worked the best for us. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you for that. Sounds like a good idea. Okay, I don't have anything further. Our next meeting is Thursday, March 23rd. Is it March 23rd? It's March 30th. Our agenda says March 23rd, but it's March 30th, correct, Erin? The last Thursday of the month, I think.
That is what is in our Outlook calendar, is the 30th.
The 30th, okay. Okay, so it is March 30th. And it will be, as we are today, it'll be a complete virtual meeting. And there'll be a lot of work to get done before then. Thank you, everyone. It was a long meeting tonight, but we got through a